Hello and welcome to episode 99 of Glitch Report. My name is GnittWitt. Thank you so much for stopping by, saying hi, kicking it with me today on the stream of dreams, the show of shows, and everything in between. You can find everything that I do over at my Linktree, linktree.com/GnittWitt, Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Skies, Instagram Threads. I am all over the place. However, I will say, as someone who just advertised all the places you can find them on social media, I found myself using fewer and fewer social media platforms these days. I hardly ever use Twitter, and every time I do open Twitter, I immediately regret it. The Twitter competitors like Instagram Threads and Blue Sky, I thought I would actually use a lot more than I did. So really the two places that you can find me outside of YouTube would be TikTok and Instagram, to be perfectly honest. That's where I post a variety of short videos and things like that. Just recently did a video on Marvel's Midnight Suns. We're going to talk Midnight Suns later in the show. But I talked about that, about how much I have been enjoying it, how much I've been surprised by it, and then also did a 5 out of 5 games update. Haven't done a 5 out of 5 games video in a while. Talked about Ghost of Tsushima and how that is just a phenomenal game, top to bottom. We'll talk Ghost of Tsushima as well. But when I make those videos, yes, I do make them for TikTok. They do the numbers that they do on TikTok, but I do also post those videos on Instagram if you are an Instagram user, as well as YouTube. So the idea being that, like, if you don't check out this podcast, which means you're not going to hear what I'm saying, and you want to get into the GnittWitt vortex, if you want to sit under the GnittWitt learning tree when it comes to spitting game about games, there are a variety of ways to do that, including on YouTube, where you can get the podcast. You can also get the shorts as well, if that is your thing. I'm just going to quickly monitor audio here for a moment. Audio's good. Okay, audio's fine. So that's kind of my approach. Like, I just don't have a lot of things to like tweet about and post in like a short form text format these days. I don't know about you. I just don't have a lot of things to say. I feel like the things that I would say are just reactionary to the bullshit that I see on a space like Twitter, right? Where it's just like, oh, I just saw like this, like this opinion is so poorly informed that I feel the need to react to it. And it's just like, no, that's exactly what they want you to do. They want you to get into some bullshit argument about wrestling or video games or politics or whatever. And I'm not saying there aren't worthwhile discussions to have about those topics. I cover some of those on this podcast, but yeah, I just find that a lot of it is garbage. A lot of it is there to trigger you into responding, debating back, engaging with them, whatever the case may be. And it's a continued reminder that while I am not a very popular creator on any of the platforms, while I'm, not raking in big numbers or anything like that, I've at least tried my best to keep it real with everyone who comes across my stuff, whether that be someone who disagrees, whether that be someone who does agree. Like, I really try not to sensationalize a lot of this stuff. You might find that I'm pretty flat when it comes to conversations about whether it's like Summer Game Fest or whatever the case may be, because, what's the point of me sitting around being like, oh, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is like the greatest game to come out this year, when I have no fucking idea, but also to make such a bold statement like that, in what is otherwise a fairly meaningless conversation, and a weird argument to start with people, it just doesn't make any sense. So if you find that, like, hey, he keeps it a little mellow, he keeps it a little, he's all about chill vibes over here, while we're, covering the news, talking about games. is because everyone else is out there just screaming at the top of their lungs about the stupidest shit. You know, people are still out there complaining about there being a black playable samurai in Assassin's Creed Shadows, right? And while I'm over here being like, well, yeah, that makes sense. He's like the first like playable historical figure in an Assassin's Creed game. Other people are like, wow, why do you have to be black and all this shit? And I'm like, man, like, what the fuck are we doing? Getting mad over shit like this. There are so many real things, not to bring down the podcast to start things off, but like, let's be honest, there are so much worse shit to be worried about, upset about, angry about, passionate about than some of the bullshit that, you know, has kind of come across my social media platforms, like Twitter especially, that are just designed to make me angry and get a reaction out of me. So, you know, if we keep it chill, keep it low key, I'm okay with that. If I never get anywhere with this stuff as a result, because I have, you know, tried to keep a level-headed, mellow approach, it is what it is. But I've been, you know, this is something I've thought about as I approach episode 100 of this show. And like, in fairness, this show has come a long way. All right, this show has, you know, especially in terms of how I want to present this, the energy, the thoughts I put into this, that this is not like caught me by surprise, that I have sat here realizing that like, I just don't want to be, you know, as much as I might be yelling into the void about, whatever it is that I'm passionate about. I want to be informed on that passion, and I feel like so many people would rather just say whatever it is they want to say, shotgun blast of bullshit, and then let the interactions, the engagement, the angry comments, the people that are agreeing, the whatever kind of roll in. But that's something I've thought about as we kind of approach episode 100 of the show, is that like, I just want to keep it real in a world where you are further and further incentivized to be the opposite of that. I would just rather have, you know, a small, like, listen, I could hang this up tomorrow and I would say, you know what, at least I tried to be real. I tried to be myself, as boring as that may be for some people. But then I'd see nice comments, you know, on things like TikTok. Someone was like, hey man, this is what was it? A person left a lovely comment on TikTok, talking about one of my videos and how it was cool. And I was like, really? This video is nothing special, but I appreciated, you know, the support that they said nonetheless, right? They said, hey man, what was it? This person left a comment saying, great video, can't wait for you to go viral. And I was like, God, if I go viral, that'll be the death of me. But it was cool and supportive nonetheless, right? But yeah, that's kind of what I thought going into this podcast as we get closer and closer to episode 100. Now, we are also getting closer and closer to summer. Summer is actually pretty much here. By the time you have listened to this, summer is upon us, which means that the Summer Game Fest is long in the rearview mirror. But not to be outdone by Summer Game Fest, Nintendo had its direct. It was about a 45-minute long video. So I mean, to I guess to outdo Sony compared to everybody else, Nintendo had their direct, their 45-minute long video showcasing stuff for the Switch. We're going to cover that on the show today. That's actually where we're going to kick things off with Paradox Interactive. Those are the big strategy game folks, making a variety of strategy games, including City Skylines. City Skylines 2, if you remember, came out and was a hot mess. They were working on a game called Life by You, which was meant to be a Sims rival. We're going to talk about the fate of that later in the show. We have some studio closures and things like that as well. Plus, and I know you're probably thinking, well, Summer Game Fest is cool. What's next? Gamescom is what's next. We're going to tell you, we're, as if I'm, you know, like an entity and not a person. We'll cover who's going and who's not, at least in our early impressions of Gamescom, what you can expect at the end of the news segment. Also, I've been playing a variety of games. I've finally got the chance. I've talked about this game and my hopes and dreams for this game, and it's been a long time coming. I feel like this is like a weirdly therapeutic chapter to kind of, you know, bookend the first 100 episodes of this podcast. I know we're not at episode 100 yet, but I have finally played AEW Fight Forever. I have finally played that game. I didn't play it for a lot, but I played it just enough to get an impression on it. We will cover that on the What I've Been Playing segment of the show. We're going to take one quick break and then we will cover Nintendo Direct. Stick around. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the podcast. Nintendo. Let's talk Nintendo. You know, I recognize, as someone who no longer owns a Nintendo Switch and things like that, that I don't always cover Nintendo, maybe to the best of my ability. But when big Nintendo stuff comes around, you know, damn it, I want to cover it. Plus, I'm someone who's, you know, looking forward to the successor to the Switch. I'm assuming it's the Switch 2. I hope it's the Switch 2. I was kind of betting on it being the Switch 2 to some extent, but the Nintendo Switch had their Direct. That was on, what was it? What day was that? That was on the 18th. That was on Tuesday, if I remember correctly. And Nintendo did not announce the follow up to the Switch. They did not say, "Hey, yo, dog, here is the Switch 2." They didn't. Instead, what they were really trying to do is, I think, send the Switch off in style to the best of their ability. So I talked about this before, and the idea that like a lot of those third-party games that you were seeing for release later this year around, you know, the winter time, there was a good chance that at one point those games were going to be Switch 2 games, and they are no longer Switch 2 games, which is why you don't see a ton of Switch games in general from third-party lack of third-party support. So, and then that's kind of always been the case. You know, third parties don't always see the value in putting stuff on Nintendo because Nintendo games run the world when it comes to Nintendo's consoles, right? And if they're not Nintendo games, it's free to play stuff like Fortnite. Like Fortnite, very, very popular on a Nintendo Switch, right? It's one of the cheapest ways to get into something like Fortnite. Overwatch, same deal, right? So what we have is kind of Nintendo, a lot of Nintendo games. I'm not going to cover everything. I'll kind of point out the stuff that kind of caught my eye, but Nintendo out there putting games out to the best of their ability in order to send the Nintendo Switch off in style. The reason why I say Nintendo Switch sending it off in style is because I suspect that this is the last summer showcase for the original Nintendo Switch. With that said, they opened up the show with Mario and Luigi Brothership. Now, Mario and Luigi is not a traditional Super Mario platforming, side-scrolling, game. What it is it's actually a turn-based RPG. So, you know, think of it as similar to those games where the combat is turn-based, but you have the button presses, you have the timing inputs for that combat. This is actually a long-running franchise for Nintendo. Both Mario and Luigi and the Paper Mario games actually trade more in the traditional side-scrolling 2D RPG instead of the platformer that you've kind of expected from Nintendo. But they're back at it again, this time with Brothership. That is out on the Nintendo Switch November 7th. So, hey, if you're wondering where are the November games at, there you are. I don't love the art style for this. There's something kind of cell shaded comic book-y about it. But it actually just looks low res and just not super sharp in my opinion. And the thing is about the Nintendo games is like, say what you will about the Switch and its ability to render fucking Geralt from The Witcher. But those Nintendo games have always looked very, very sharp. And even when they don't have the greatest frame rate, like something, similar to, Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild, and Tears of the Kingdom. That being said, I just didn't love the art style for this. I've also never been a big Mario Luigi guy, but hey, maybe, this time in November, I will be saying, oh my God, I just can't, I want to play it, but we shall see. Nintendo World Championships. This is a collection of old games, and it is all about speed running these games and completing various challenges. So Excite Bike, Original Mario, stuff like that in this collection called Nintendo World Championships NES Edition. You can also play these old games head-to-head with other players in an attempt to be the last one standing as you make your way through various challenges. and that's out soon. That's out July 18th. If you have never played this game, it might be because you don't have access to Apple Arcade, in which case you can get Apple Arcade if that is your thing. But Fantasian Neo Dimension is from the Final Fantasy creator Hironobu Sakaguchi. The Gooch Man is back with Fantasian Neo Dimension, which is a turn-based role-playing game. It was originally out on Apple Arcade. It is now coming to Nintendo Switch. Nintendo Switch Sports, I should say, is getting an update. Basketball is coming to Nintendo Switch Sports. It is a free update, so if you own Nintendo Switch Sports, now you can play basketball. Speaking of updates, Disney Illusion Island is getting an update. That is the 2D side-scrolling platforming adventure game featuring Mickey and Minnie and Donald and Goofy, and that is a free update that is out now for Illusion Island. Speaking of games that were on Apple Arcade that are now making their way to other services, Hello Kitty Island Adventure is going to be making its way to Nintendo Switch as well as PlayStation and Xbox consoles. However, it is going to be a timed exclusive for Nintendo players, so you will get the first crack at it on Nintendo when that game comes out. Hello Kitty Island Adventures, a very much a cozy game, much more of a like slice of life, kind of adventure RPG. You're going around town, you're talking to people, you're doing island adventure stuff. Nothing like you didn't give Hello Kitty a fucking shotgun. This is not Hello Kitty the Dark Ages. This is Hello Kitty chill out on an island, the video game. Looney Tunes Wacky World of Sports. This is, I'm assuming, another game that is going to be coming to multi-platforms, though I was not able to confirm it at the time of this recording. Let me see here. Yeah, this is coming to other consoles as well. But basically, this is a has 4 arcade-style sports mini games, including soccer and basketball, all with Looney Tunes characters in it. It'll be arriving on Switch, and I'm assuming other consoles this fall, but it is basically, hey, we put 4 arcade sports games together so you can play soccer and tennis with Bugs Bunny, if that is your thing. So this is where, so you'll notice that some of the games that I've been talking about have not been, made and published by Nintendo, right? I mean, the games that we have so far are Mario and Luigi, Nintendo World Championships, that update for Nintendo Switch Sports. But now there's this idea that like, hey, the Switch is riding into the sunset. We should probably get some games out there that people haven't had a chance to play before, such as Donkey Kong Country Returns HD. Now, the reason it's called Donkey Kong Country Returns HD is because A, there had not been a lot of Donkey Country games prior to Donkey Country Returns coming out. And the HD means that this game was originally out on the Wii. So this is quite an old game that is finally making its way to Nintendo Switch. That'll be out June 16th. Now, this is not to be confused with Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, which originally was a Wii U game that also made its way to the Switch. So you can see Nintendo trying to, beef up its Switch library to the best of its abilities before the Switch is done. However, Donkey Kong Country Returns HD, not a 2024 game. That'll be out January 16th. Now, this was a weird way to announce things, but I guess I didn't realize that this had already been announced and that they were kind of going backwards to some extent with their announcement. I'll explain in a moment. Dragon Quest III is getting an HD 2D remake. That will be coming to Nintendo Switch November 14th. Now, I want to confirm if this is a Switch exclusive or not. I could see it being a Switch exclusive, but I could be wrong. Let me see here. Pre-order now. I'm on the website. No, okay. So, again, a scenario very similar to something like the Sony showcase, similar to the Xbox showcase. Some of these games are not Switch exclusives. So, if we go back for just a moment, things like Looney Tunes, Hello Kitty are not Switch exclusives. and neither is Dragon Quest 3 HD 2D, which is coming to PlayStation, Xbox, and Steam. And what this is, if you've never seen, HD 2D is a very silly name to describe a very cool art style. The idea is that they have, and this is something that Square Enix has done. Square Enix has tried to maintain the classic retro look of their old games, but present them in a, in a style that looks incredibly high resolution. So the pixels are still there and things like that, but it's incredibly high resolution so that it runs on modern consoles. You can see that in stuff like Octopath Traveler and other games like that. So my understanding is that they had announced this game a long time ago, but it's finally coming out November 14th. Then they said that remakes for Dragon Quest 1 and Dragon Quest 2 will also be in HD 2D, but those will be coming in 2025. I guess people were like, well, wait a minute, you announced a remake for 3 a long time ago. Where's 1 and 2? And my understanding is that Square Enix is intending for you to play 3 and then 1 and then 2, which seems a little confusing, but listen, you should check out the trailer for this so you can kind of get an understanding of like what that art style looks like if you've never seen it before, though it has been going around for quite some time. But it is interesting nonetheless. Now I just need to go ahead and there we go. All right. Speaking of HD updates, Luigi's Mansion 2 HD is coming to Nintendo Switch on June 27th. Luigi's Mansion 2 was originally a Nintendo 3DS game that was on the older, I guess I should say, Nintendo handheld. If you never played Luigi's Mansion, if you don't know what Luigi's Mansion is, Luigi's Mansion was originally a launch game for the Nintendo GameCube back around the PS2 and original Xbox era. And Luigi's Mansion is Ghostbusters. Like it's pretty much Luigi on his own in a haunted mansion, hunting ghosts. And it has a very cute style to it. There have been 3 of them so far now. And I've never actually played a Luigi's Mansion game. I don't know where I'd even begin, but I don't think 1 is accessible. I think it's only 2 and 3 that are accessible. But anyways, that's getting an HD update. Luigi's Mansion out June 27th, if that is your thing. The new Denpa Men is a weird Animal Crossing-like game from Nintendo coming to Nintendo Switch July 27th. There was a big update for the Nintendo Switch Online. So, I talk a lot about PlayStation Plus. I talk a lot about Game Pass. I don't talk a lot about the Nintendo Switch Online. And what that is that it's their subscription service for the Nintendo console. It allows you to play games online. It also gives you access to a variety of classic Nintendo games, though not all of them. And I find that like for a company that has, listen, I don't care if you're a PlayStation diehard, if you're an Xbox diehard. Nintendo is the Disney of video games, right? They have a certain je ne sais quoi. They have been doing this longer than just about anybody in the game. And because of that, they have perhaps, and I hate to use this term because it's such a Disney-like word to describe them as, but they have one of the most magical catalogs in all of gaming, right? And I feel like the Nintendo Switch Online has been so lacking for so long for a variety of reasons that it's always like feels too little too late when they do an update. But they did. And what you're getting is the Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past 4 Swords. That is the Game Boy Advance version of A Link to the Past. You are getting Metroid Zero Mission. You're getting Turok, Dinosaur Hunter, and Perfect Dark. You'll also be able to play 4 Swords online with your friends for the first time too. Turok, if you have been keeping up with Turok is the first-person shooter like dinosaur game. This is not the HD kind of remasters, remakes of those Turok games. Those are not the updated versions of Turok. This is original ass Nintendo 64 Turok on your Nintendo Switch. So if you're wondering, why does Turok look like absolute dog shit? That's why. Turok was a bad game when it came out on Nintendo 64. And instead of doing the remake of Turok, which Nintendo didn't have anything to do with, they are instead doing the classic version of Turok. Now, for those of you that are looking to get your Turok on, you could go play the Turok remaster, which supports high resolution and widescreen, also features improved gameplay, level design, dynamic lighting and visuals, and the ability to rebind all keyboard, mouse, and gamepad units. I'm looking at the Steam listing for the Turok remake. If that is your thing, they also have Turok 2 and 3. But I don't know about these Turok games, man. Like, don't get me wrong, I like the idea of shooting dinosaurs. I just don't know about this one. One of my most exciting one of the most exciting moments, in my opinion, from the Nintendo update was Marvel vs. Capcom Fighting Collection Arcade Classics, which is 7 different classic Marvel fighting and brawler games coming out in one package. Now, I'll be honest with you, I don't always get too suckered into the idea of these big arcade collections, right? Because what I typically feel like happens is you see it, you play it, you get excited about it, and then you realize that those games maybe had 15, 30, an hour, maybe 2 hours of enjoyment, right? Because nostalgia is a very cheap drug. It's a very cheap, quick high. And I hate to use like a term like that to describe it, but like, oh my God, I can play all these old games, and then you play them for X amount of time and you're like, oh, okay, that's cool. Right. So for me, like, I have tried to temper expectations to some extent, but if we look at the games that you are getting, do they have a list? Yes. So here's a list. So this is 7 games in one collection. You are getting X-Men Children of the Atom, which is the X-Men fighting game. Marvel Superheroes, which is the follow-up to X-Men Children of the Atom. X-Men versus Street Fighter. Then you are getting Marvel Superheroes versus Street Fighter. You're getting Marvel vs. Capcom's Clash of Superheroes. Marvel vs. Capcom 2, New Age of Heroes, and you're getting the Punisher. The Punisher is not a fighting game. It's a 2D side-scrolling brawler beat 'em up type game. So I've never played the older games in this list. For me, it kind of starts and stops with Marvel vs. Capcom 2. I remember the first time playing Marvel vs. Capcom 2 was on the PS3 because Capcom had re-released it. They were re-releasing a couple of games at the time on PS3, like digital. Like, I think they did that and Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo HD Remix. And I bought both those games because I was like, oh, I don't know a lot about Street Fighter and all this stuff. And then I played a little bit of Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo HD Remix, and I was like, maybe I'm not a big Street Fighter guy, or this old Street Fighter with new graphics maybe isn't doing anything for me. But then I played Marvel vs. Capcom 2, and I was like, holy shit, I get to play as like Captain America and Mega Man and the people from Resident Evil and all this shit versus, Ryu from Street Fighter versus Venom versus all this crazy shit. And it was also just like a wild fighting game because I'd never played a 3-on-3. So that's the other thing about Marvel vs. Capcom 2 specifically, is that it is a 3-on-3 fighting game. So every time you die, your other teammates get tagged in. You can also tag them in at various points in the fight to trigger supers and specials and stuff like that as well. It is perhaps one of the most obnoxious is a strong word. It is just one of the most sensory overload fighting games that you can play, because it's like, oh, Captain America just threw his shield and now Spider-Man's jumping in to swing, and then, the Hulk's doing his thing or whatever. And it's a lot to take in, but I just love the style. I love the vibe. I love the idea of Marvel vs. Capcom. I always thought that Marvel vs. Capcom could be more, in the sense that, like, why didn't we get like, or maybe they did, I don't know, but like, why didn't we get comics? Like, I would love to see fucking the Resident Evil, people hanging out with the X-Men doing dirt or whatever. Like, that's like, why not, right? Disney and Capcom love money. Why don't they do that? And also, and I'm not saying they should do this, but this was at a time when Marvel was on their own. Now that Marvel is owned by Disney, what's to stop? Lawyers is the question. It's like, what's to stop this from happening? It's lawyers. But what's to stop us from potentially getting like a Disney versus Capcom? Like what would it take to get Mega Man to fight, Indiana Jones, right? Like Darth Vader versus Captain America or whatever. Like, I think there's a lot of potential there, especially when you've seen all the stuff that is crossed over with Disney and Square Enix when it comes to stuff like Kingdom Hearts. But anyways, that is coming out. When is that out? Did they announce a date? They did not announce a date. Oh yeah, that was the other thing. Did not announce a date. But anyways, getting 7 games in one package if that is your thing. Super Mario Party Jamboree is coming out October 17th. Super Mario Party is the worst Nintendo series ever, all time. It is the worst, and I'm going to move on from that. They showed off The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom, and it is coming out September 26th. Now, this is not like Tears of the Kingdom or Breath of the Wild. This is more of a traditional Zelda from that kind of top-down perspective. And the twist is that this time around, you are not playing as Link, of course, being the main playable protagonist in the Legend of Zelda games. Despite the name, you play as Link. But this time around, you're playing as Zelda. Now, Zelda does not have the same swords and weaponry that Link has. Instead, they have given Zelda a magic wand, and she's going to be conjuring up and controlling the environment as part of the puzzle solving and as part of the combat. So they showed off like Zelda taking control of one of the monsters to fight alongside her to, fight throughout the game as well, which is kind of neat. They showed off more Lego Horizon Adventures, which is also coming to Switch. They announced that Stray is coming to Nintendo Switch during the holiday. They showed off Tales of the Shire, a Lord of the Rings game. Again, going for that life RPG simulation type game, similar to something like Hello Kitty Island Adventures, similar to something like Animal Crossing. And it did not look very good. It looked like graphic. I don't like the art style. I don't like the frame rate. I don't like a lot about the way that game looks when it's paused or how it looks when it's in motion. It's just not doing it for me, unfortunately. But hey, maybe that's because they were showing off the Switch version, which may not look as good as the PC. Now, I hope you don't object to this, but Ace Attorney Investigations Collection is coming to Nintendo Switch on September 6th. That is 2 Ace Attorney games in one collection. Ace Attorney, if you never played Ace Attorney is a lawyer RPG adventure game. The idea is that most of the game is taking place in courtrooms where you're going back and forth as a lawyer throughout the game, with each level consisting of different cases and things like that. I've never played an Ace Attorney game, long-running franchise, courtesy of Capcom, but we're getting more Ace Attorney if that is your thing. I'm curiosity though. Like I've always kind of attributed Ace Attorney to stuff like on the Nintendo consoles, but can you get Ace Attorney games elsewhere? Like if I don't know, like I'll go to PlayStation or something. Ace. I don't even know. How do I spell attorney? Maybe it's just not. It's just never come to like a PlayStation or something. Let me see here. I am very curious. If I go to PlayStation and I'm like, yo dog, I want some Ace Attorney. Okay, there are. And in fact, that Ace Attorney game is coming to, oh my God, there's so many Ace Attorney games on PlayStation. Jesus Christ. Most of them being collections of them. So, okay. I'll just pick it on PlayStation because I was like, that was the easiest thing for me to look up because I know they're on Steam, I think. Anyways, moving on. This is the last thing we'll talk about. They ended their showcase with Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, which was originally called Metroid Prime 4. Metroid Prime 4 was announced back in 2017 as a Nintendo Switch game. It has been a long time coming. They kind of did the Ubisoft thing where they showed, actually to give Nintendo credit, they showed off a lot more than Ubisoft did for something like Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time remake. They showed off a little bit of gameplay, And when I was watching the gameplay for Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, I thought to myself, this looks better than something the Nintendo Switch is currently capable of producing from a graphic standpoint. Yeah, it's unfinished. Yeah, it looks a little rough, but you just look at the resolution, you look at the clarity, you look at the graphics in it, and you think, I don't know, man, this doesn't look like a game that could run on Nintendo Switch. Leading me to believe that Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, with its 2025 release date, is not actually a Nintendo Switch game, but in fact a Nintendo Switch 2 game. And yeah, they showed off a couple other things from third parties and stuff like that. But just to kind of reiterate what I was talking about, a lot of things changed when the Switch 2 was delayed. I'm going off this idea that Nintendo Switch 2 was delayed. So that's why we're seeing stuff that Nintendo was able to quickly conjure up in a couple of different scenarios, right? I think Mario Luigi Brothership, they were probably working on that for some time. But stuff like Nintendo Switch Championships, like those are old games with a twist, right? Nintendo Switch Sports update, that's just an update to a pre-existing game. If you look at stuff like Donkey Kong Country HD Returns, whatever the hell the game's called, that's an old game with a twist. The twist being that you can play it on modern consoles. Again, Luigi's Mansion 2 HD, an old game with a twist, right? Old games coming to Nintendo Switch Online, right? Mario Party, whatever, right? Like the coolest stuff that they showed was that new Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom game, and that new Metroid Prime 4, kind of update, right? So to me, this does very much seem like the last hurrah for the Nintendo Switch, which is fine because it was a scenario where they probably wanted that console in time for holiday this year. It did not work out that way. And what we're kind of seeing is what they could do in the time that they had. Overall, I thought the Nintendo Direct was totally fine, right? Like you go into it with this understanding that like they're not ready to show you the big guns, because the big guns that they have to show are probably not coming to the console that you currently own. So, we kind of talked about this with, Ubisoft and Summer Game Fest and Xbox and stuff like that. And it's this idea of, do you sell the steak or do you sell the sizzle, right? To me, when I saw the Zelda, the Echoes of the Past game, I was like, oh, this looks like a pretty cool game to play on a Switch if I wanted to still play games on the Switch, and things like that, right? So that is a scenario where like I was bought into the game itself, what they showed. I was bought into that game based on what they showed alone, because they actually showed gameplay. So in that scenario, I bought into the steak, right? Based on what they had to show. In the scenario of Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, they showed a tiny amount of gameplay, but it was very, very, very vague. And to me, that's more about Nintendo trying to sell the sizzle of like, oh wow, look at the graphics on this thing. Like, this is much nicer than what I could get on a regular Switch. I wonder if that means that this is coming to Switch 2 and what other Switch 2 games could look like. It kind of gets the gears turning. It's more of a slow burn in terms of anticipation when it comes to stuff like Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. But overall, like I thought Nintendo Direct was decent. I think it's a decent time. I think checking in on Nintendo is always, even if you don't play Nintendo games, I think is always a valid way to get an idea of where the industry is at, because Nintendo was always out there kind of doing their own thing. They've been doing their own thing, regardless of third-party publisher support, for a very, very long time, right? So to see Nintendo just out there taking swings at, the couple of franchises that they can get, games for out in time for a new Switch, in the fall, in the new year, stuff like that. I liked it. Like I thought it was cool, and I can't complain at what Nintendo had to offer, because at least it showed a sense of direction, unlike something. And I don't mean to compare apples to oranges, but if you don't think this way, that's fine. If you just take what they present to you, they being the people running these, games conferences, these game showcases, if you just take what they show you on a title by title basis, that's fine. But I can't help but look at these and be like, what's the story that these companies are trying to tell with their showcase? What is the message beyond just these individual games? When I look at something like Ubisoft, it is very much that they are all in on supporting the old games that they already put out and making sure that Star Wars Outlaws and Assassin's Creed Shadows gets out the door, right? I look at the showcase from Summer Game Fest, and it was very much around, hey, indies are going to kind of bail us out when it comes to a lot of games coming out this year, assuming they don't get delayed, right? The same thing with like Day of the Devs, but Day of the Devs always focused on indie stuff. You look at Xbox, and Xbox is like, hey, listen, we have been working on a lot of games for a very long time, some of which we have not even announced for you. Here they are, Doom of the Dark Ages. Here's an update on Fable. Here's an update on Perfect Dark. Hey, that Call of Duty game we've been actually working on for a really long time, despite Call of Duty being an annualized franchise. And here's what we kind of have to show. Here's like, they had an update of like, we are trying to capture the attention of people, both short term and long term. And yes, that's obviously what all these companies are trying to do, right? Get you excited for the games coming out in the next 6 to 8 months. Get people excited for games that are coming out, 12 months from now, right? Sony, again, pretty focused on the short term of like, we just got to get through 2024 because we do not have a lot of games for it. So let's just try to put our best foot forward with showcasing Concord or whatever as part of our 2024. Nintendo, same thing, but I feel like at least with Nintendo, they were at least able to dangle that carrot on the stick of like, hey, Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, this could be something big. And I think as a result, like I thought Nintendo did a decent job of trying to balance the anticipation for what goes beyond the Nintendo Switch that we currently have, but also stuff that you're going to be able to continue to play on your Switch should you keep doing so. We will take one more break and then we'll be back with more news. Stick around. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the podcast. This next news story is a real doozy. Let me load it up here because there's a lot to this. Like a lot. So, Paradox Interactive, they're the folks that, like I said, made City Skylines and Crusader Kings and Stellaris and a bunch of other typically turn-based strategy games, though I've also gotten into real-time strategy games as well. Again, think about something like City Skylines 1 and 2. City Skylines 1, very good game. City Skylines 2, not a great game. And, Paradox Interactive were starting to get a little bullish. They were starting to get a little ambitious, and they wanted to come at the king. The king being EA, the game being The Sims. So Paradox had announced that they were going to make a Sims-like competitor called Life by You. All right. Not a lot was shown about the game. However, there were delays and we were starting to see maybe the writing on the walls to some extent, but to be honest, what the writing on the walls looked like at the time did not spell what the end results were. The game was originally scheduled to launch in early access in September of 2023, was then delayed to March of 2024, and then pushed back again to June, right? So the idea was that they were already going to put out this game in an unfinished state to get, ideas for, how to improve on the game, to get money rolling in, by selling this unfinished version of the game. Again, back in June. Now, in late April, Paradox had issued a press release stating that the game was, quote, ready for early access, but 3 weeks later, it was delayed indefinitely, right? So, in March, they delayed it to June, but in April, they were like, hey, it's ready, and then they delayed it, right? The game has been canceled. the game's not coming out. The game is not coming out. This was announced by Paradox Interactive CEO on Monday. Saying, sadly, we've decided to cancel the release of our long-awaited life sim, Life by You. This was an incredibly difficult call to make, and it is a clear failure on Paradox's part to meet both our own and community expectations. Now, here's the thing to note is that Life by You was to be the debut title from Paradox Tectonic, a studio established in 2019 and headed by Rod Humble. If you don't know Rod Humble is the former boss of EA's The Sims label and the ex-CEO of Second Life creator Linden Lab, Rod Humble, knows a thing or two about simulating life in a video game. So this is not like some no-name, I'm not picking on people who are just getting their foot in the door, but like they got one of the guys from The Sims and Second Life to get this game out the door, and even then it completely failed. They go on to say, a few weeks back, we decided to hold off on an early access release in order to reevaluate Life by You, as we still felt that the game was lacking in some key areas. Though a time extension was an option, once we took that pause to get a wider view of the game, it became clear to us that the road leading to a release that we felt confident about was far too long and uncertain. This is obviously tough and disappointing for everyone who poured their time and enthusiasm into this project, especially when our decision comes so late in the process. But Paradox has had a rough go at it, man, because in April, Paradox announced that customers who purchased the City Skylines 2 first DLC would be refunded, with the content set to be added to the base game for free after being rushed out in an unsatisfactory state. Further paid DLC and the game's console versions were also delayed again. So keep in mind that when City Skylines 2 came out, it was not a early access game. The idea being that it was a finished game that would continue to receive free updates and paid updates. Now you might be wondering, what's the difference between early access and, buying a game now if it's still going to get updates? The idea being that early access games tend to be cheaper than full price games. They also tend to have the expectation that they're in a much more rough state. They're much more fluid in what can be changed and developed over time based on community feedback. The problem was that City Skylines 2 was a broken, buggy piece of shit game that might as well have been in early access considering how much work needed to be done on the game. So when you have a game like that was not meant to be early access come out in such a rough shape, and then you have a game that is planning on being early access that is currently in such a rough shape, at some point you need to know when to hold them and when to fold them. And I hate to use that cliche, but it's true, right? Because imagine a scenario where Life by You comes out. They have set all of the expectations that they possibly can, being like, hey, this game is unfinished. It's broken. We're trying to fix it. We're trying to work on it. We need your support. If you buy the game now, you get a discount, whatever. And then people are still mad, right? Like if it fails to meet even the lowest of the lowest expectations that Paradox can possibly set, like they can't keep doing this. Like I have not checked in on City Skylines in a very, very long time because I was like, I would rather just buy City Skylines 1, buy the DLC. I already own City Skylines 1, but I'm better off just buying all of the DLC for City Skylines 2. So I have a lot more stuff at my disposal instead of fucking around wasting my time with this awful unfinished game. Now, maybe City Skylines 2 is in a better place. I don't know, but I just don't think that Paradox would be able to take the risk, even if they wanted to, with something like Life by You. Unfortunately, this story does not end. After Paradox announced the cancellation of Life by You, they also announced the closure of Tectonic Studio. The studio employed 24 people, and again was founded in 2019, headed by former Sims boss Rod Humble. Now, I think the thing to kind of note about this is you might be thinking, well, why cut the team? Because this team was literally made for the purpose of one thing. I'm not saying they couldn't go on to make other games or they didn't have any other value, but this team was designed and built to produce a Sims-like game. They were not able to get that game into a position where it was going to be released. So if you're Paradox, why keep the team? I'm not saying these people deserve to lose their jobs. I wish everybody the best of luck. I hope everyone lands on their feet. I mean this because it must have been a real tumultuous time getting that game to even in a state where it could be canceled. So I wish everybody the best. But if you're Paradox, what are you going to do with this team, right? You're not going to try it again because you could have maybe kept them going or allowed them to scrap it and restart it. I don't know. But in this scenario, I don't know what else they could have done. And I think the real disappointing thing is, I think, as much as I think Sims 4 is a decent game, I like Sims 4 a lot, there is no competition in the market. I think one of the reasons why EA gets away with the things that it does in terms of sports games and in terms of kind of the mediocrity around Need for Speed. Need for Speed's not even relevant enough to these days to get the competition that it probably needs anyways. But the reason why EA games are the way they are is that EA does not see a lot of competition when it comes to the unique markets that it operates in. Something like sports games, something like the life sim games. So to me, I was actually really rooting for this game for the longest time, ever since it was announced, because I love the idea of like, oh, maybe this is going to be like a really cool Sims game. Maybe it'll have a twist. It'll maybe give more direct control, direct movement, whatever the case may be. But now it's like, hey man, if you want to play one of those games, the only option you have is something like The Sims. The other thing I would say is that like Paradox is also in this interesting scenario where like nobody else kind of makes the grand strategy games that they do. Like there aren't a lot of games like Crusader Kings out there that's really kind of competing with Paradox. So Paradox also in a scenario where they can kind of rest on their laurels to some extent. I mean, EA is not even bothering to make SimCity games anymore because Paradox came in and ate their lunch with City Skylines and then continued to shit the bed with City Skylines 2. But this is a scenario where like I was really pulling for the folks making Life by You because I wanted to see what a different take on The Sims like could be. The bad times just keep on rolling. Not to be outdone by Paradox, Embracer Group has announced that they are closing the studio that developed the Alone in the Dark reboot, Pieces Interactive. Pieces Interactive was a Swedish company established in 2007 and had developed over 10 games. We kind of talked about how critically and commercially that game did not set the world on fire, unfortunately. And here we are now with confirmation that Pieces Interactive will no longer be around, which is a damn shame. Which is a damn shame. They kind of go on to say that PC Interactive had released over 10 titles on PC, consoles, and mobile since 2007, both our own concepts such as Puzzlegeddon, Fret Nice, Leviathan Warships, RoboSurf, and Kill to Collect, as well as work for hire on titles such as Magicka 2 and several Magicka DLCs. In 2017, Pieces Interactive were acquired by Embracer Group after working with the expansion for Titan Quest Ragnarok, and the third expansion for Titan Quest Atlantis. Our last release was the reimagining of Alone in the Dark. It's unclear how many people were let go as part of this, but Embracer does say, like, it failed to meet sales expectations. And also even Video Games Chronicles in this article, as always, shout out to Video Games Chronicles, but Video Games Chronicles in this story cites their own review for Alone in the Dark, saying that the game was criticized for its design choices, saying it was let down by annoying and repetitive puzzles, poor combat, and frequent glitches. So, gosh, let's just be as mean as possible. I don't mean to be, but like, if we're talking the tiered rankings of survival horror franchises today, Alone in the Dark is closer to the bottom than it is the top. And I'm not just nostalgia be damned, whatever. I'm just telling you how it is, right? I'm probably going to anger the same people I angered when I talked about Silent Hill. But when we think about the rankings for regardless of current quality and things like that, just in terms of public relevance and appetite for these games, Alone in the Dark, the franchise, is closer to the bottom of the list than it is at the top. So for a game like this to come out and not be good, there is very little hope for the franchise, and unfortunately, probably not much hope for the team as well, especially when that team is working for a company like Embracer Group. But regardless, I hope everyone involved lands on their feet. That is not the only studio closure. The developer of Wizard with a Gun, Galvanac Games is closing down. Wizard with a Gun, also published by Devolver. Posting to Twitter, the president and co-founder Patrick Morgan wrote, "With heavy heart, I announced the closure of Galvanac Games. Despite claiming that Wizard with a Gun got off to a promising start, sales of the title were not enough to sustain the studio. Quote, I may never get over the irony of spending a decade building my ideal team only for it to end after our most productive year. The dedication, creativity, and hard work of every person on our team has been nothing short of extraordinary. Thank you for the support and memories. We are grateful for the journey and the hope that our paths will cross again in the future." So the thing about Wizard with a Gun is that it did not have an amazing launch. When it launched, it kind of was lacking in a couple of different ways, unfortunately, and it seems like there was just not enough patience for, the future of that game as it pertains to updates and, getting people back in with sales and stuff like that, which is a damn shame. But again, I hope everybody lands on their feet at that studio as well. Got a couple more news stories. These are maybe not the biggest, juiciest, but I felt like running through them anyways. Todd Howard was out there talking that shit about, Bethesda and Fallout and Elder Scrolls and all that stuff. Because people have been wondering, hey, that Fallout TV show is one of the most popular, most well-regarded video game TV shows ever made. What the fuck's up with new Fallout, right? And Todd Howard went out there and said that they will not be rushing Fallout 5. So, Bethesda game studios are currently working on updates and expansion content for Starfield. They're currently in pre-production on Elder Scrolls 6, which means that the next game would be Fallout 5, which is a hell of a long ways away. Something that they probably couldn't even get ready in time for season 2 of Fallout the TV show, let alone season 3. Though I do find it, and this is not relating to games, but I gotta say, I was looking at some old TV shows recently. I was scrolling through Disney Plus, and I just picked two titles. I was King of the Hill and X-Files, and I was looking how like those seasons of TV were a lot longer than the current seasons of TV that we have. And I just felt like, why is every season of TV anywhere between 6 to 10 episodes long? Like, what happened to the 20, plus, episodes of a season, 20 plus episodes of seasonal TV, right? What we get right now is a scenario where fucking House of the Dragon comes out and it's like 8 to 10 episodes long. And then we have to wait like 2 goddamn years later for the next thing. And it's just as short as the last season. Like, I just wonder, like, is it a scenario where people do not want to be working all year round on the same TV show? Like, I just don't get it. But, that still doesn't change the fact that developing video games is even slower than developing TV shows these days, which means that don't expect a Fallout 5 anytime soon, says Todd Howard. Though I would really like to see something from Fallout, and I'm not talking Fallout 76. I know that if you ask the executives and the creative people at Bethesda, they would say that the current ongoing Fallout game is Fallout 76. If you want Fallout, if you can't get enough Fallout, go play Fallout 76. They're going to continue to put out content for that game. I got to be honest, I don't want to play Fallout 76. I played it and it's okay, but I don't want to play any more of it. I want a new Fallout game. So, the thing that, Bethesda and Todd Howard are talking about is that there are no plans to rush out a new Fallout game, which I think means a couple of things. One, that wouldn't stop them from potentially doing a remake or remaster of a classic Fallout game. I think Fallout 3 is right there for remastering. I think you could potentially get a different studio to do a spin-off. I'm not saying Oblivion are going to be the ones to do it, because Oblivion's working on Avowed. Oblivion's working on the Outer Worlds 2. But there's got to be somebody that Microsoft can either build a team around or acquire or something to get a smaller, more focused Fallout game out the door between now and Fallout 5, because this is ridiculous. Like, I know they probably weren't expecting the Fallout show to be as successful as it was. And also, Bethesda hasn't quite started working on new titles since the acquisition by Microsoft. But this feels like failing to strike while the iron is hot. Like, say what you will about Sony and the fact that they keep putting out goddamn Last of Us remasters every 6 months, but at least they were ready when the TV show came out. They had something. The only thing that Fallout has is updates to Fallout 76, which, in fairness, did see an increase in player count. They did have that next generation update, which didn't do so hot for Fallout 4. I just wish there was more to it than what we had seen, but as of right now, Fallout 5 not happening anytime soon. That's because Bethesda is targeting annual story expansions for Starfield. They announced that Shattered Space is coming out. They also said that Shattered Space expansion is kind of similar to Fallout 4's Far Harbor in terms of scope and size, but the idea is that, like, every year you could probably expect a new premium expansion for Starfield, which I think means two things. One, don't expect Starfield to end anytime soon. But two, that means that they're probably going to be sprinkling in more free updates in between these expansions. Now, I'm not expecting big, significant changes to the game. I'm not expecting big, significant free content for the game. But in order to keep people engaged and in order to get people to pay for more content, they got to have other stuff. So I suspect that they're in it for the long haul with Starfield. I just don't know when it's going to end. But as of right now, they're at least planning one more premium expansion for Starfield after Shattered Space. Okay. Who's in and who's not when it comes to Gamescom? PlayStation has announced that they are skipping Gamescom. That is the next big gaming showcase happening in Germany in August. PlayStation won't be there, but Xbox will be. Xbox also promised its biggest booth ever. Now, we don't talk about booths in when we talk about, Summer Game Fest and Gamescom. But what separates Gamescom from Summer Game Fest is that Gamescom is open to the public, right? They will have events, they'll have media days and stuff like that where influencers, journalists, whatever will show up. But also you can just go buy a ticket and then go to Gamescom, which is why Xbox is promising its biggest booth ever, because they want to be the biggest of the big dogs at Gamescom this year, especially if Sony's not going to be there, especially if Nintendo's going to have a lot of old remastered games getting re-released onto Nintendo Switch. They want to be like, yo dog, you want to see this new big game from us? It's fucking Indiana Jones. Let's go. Here's Call of Duty. Try out the omnidirection movement system, whatever the case is. So that's what separates, kind of Gamescom from Summer Game Fest. That Gamescom is open to the public, and that's why Xbox wants to be there, promising its biggest booth yet. We're going to take one more break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the games that I've been playing. Stick around. We ain't going anywhere. Welcome back to the podcast. Thank you for hanging out for that break. Though obviously if you're listening to the audio version or watching the podcast video, there is no break for you. So I was over at I was over at a family member's house. They have a PS5. It's also really cool that they listen to the podcast. But they have a PS5, and we were checking out some games, playing some games over at their place. And we were both very, very curious to check out AEW Fight Forever. Not because we spent any good money on it, but because AEW Fight Forever was one of the free PlayStation Plus games. Now, it also helps that me and this family member are both wrestling fans, who I think both of us. So I've played more wrestling games than they have, but I think both of us know better when it comes to wrestling games. The idea being that like wrestling is a very specific thing. How you depict it in wrestling games can mean that it is oversimplified or overcomplicated, or sometimes just a weird, poor representation of whatever, a promotion, right? I'm not even talking about like a game that tries to encompass all of wrestling. I'm just like, well, how does the AEW game represent AEW? How does the WWE game do in terms of capturing the vibe of a WWE product, even if you disregard the controls, the gameplay, and all of that stuff? And I had like heard a lot about the AEW Fight Forever game. I had never played it, right? So we fire it up, and it is very much, I would say, no different than a WWE game. It very much wants to hit you up for additional content purchases right out of the gate, right? They have not, this game's been out for a while. They've not done a sequel to it. Instead, what they've done is continue to put out some free updates, but more importantly, more paid content, right? And I think it's the scenario where they're just going to try to get as much money from the people that are into this game as they can, because I don't think this game sold amazingly. It didn't do amazing critically. So if there's anyone out there willing to pay $12 to play as Adam Copeland or Swerve Strickland or Samoa Joe, damn it, they're going to get that money, because again, I just think, critically and sales wise, this game didn't do so hot. But whatever, right? A lot of games fucking hit you up for, hey man, why don't you, like, I'm playing Marvel's Midnight Suns. We'll talk Midnight Suns, but like as soon as you load that game up, they're like, hey man, what if you bought some costumes and shit for your characters? Now, in fairness, they don't really hit you up for that stuff once you're actually in the game, but in the main menu, it might as well be a shopping mall. So you load up AEW Fight Forever, and it's like, hey, you should, buy the Acclaimed and whatever, right? And you're like, okay, whatever. They have their career mode, they have create a wrestler mode, they have create an arena mode, and all of this stuff. They also have their free game update, which is the what the hell is that game called? Not Anarchy in the Arena, a Stadium Stampede, which I think just goes to show you like how hard it is to make a current wrestling game, because we no longer call them Stadium Stampedes, because there's no empty arenas anymore, courtesy of COVID and lockdowns. So now going forward, all those big, street fight brawls that AEW has are referred to as Anarchy in the Arena, but whatever, right? But regardless, they have a Stadium Stampede mode. And we fired it up, and it is a multiplayer online battle royal, where it's a handful of people in a match, and actually it's more than a handful of people in the match. Let me see if I can pull up the actual numbers, because I was not able to get a great idea of how many people were in that match at any given time. When we were playing, let me see if I can find it. Oh my God. It's not great when you go to Steam to look up information on a game, and the first thing you see is mostly negative reviews for a game, but whatever. How many fucking players are in this god dang game? Okay, I'll go to update history, see if I can find it. Stadium Stampede. Does it give me that information? It does not. I'm trying to. Okay. Stadium Stampede. It's 30 people in one football field. Okay. 30 people. When we fired it up, I don't know if there are 30 people in that game. I think that game might have started with more than 30 people, or sorry, less than 30 people in that match, because it is an online game. And for a game that may not be super popular, that requires that many people in an online match, it might be really hard to get a game together. We had to wait like a few minutes, like maybe 2 or 3 minutes. It wasn't actually that bad. I was surprised on a random afternoon, that non like weekend afternoon, that we were able to find people. But regardless, you get into it, you pick up weapons and upgrades and currency and whatever, and it's Fortnite. It's basically Fortnite, except without the guns and without falling from the sky. And it didn't really look or feel anything like the main AEW Fight Forever game. Like, I don't think it controlled the same. I don't think it looked the same. It just felt so out of place. That being said, it seemed like, if we only played one match, but it seemed like something that you could maybe get into. Which is to say that I think it might actually be better than the main AEW Fight Forever game. AEW Fight Forever really leaning into that idea that it is going to be an easy to pick up arcade button mashing sort of wrestling game. It is not nearly as complicated as something like WWE 2K, and probably for better, right? I'm not saying that their ideas weren't admirable. It's just that their efforts weren't good, because finishing the Stadium Stampede match, I was like, okay, well, what's this game actually like? And it's pretty ugly. Like, it's a pretty ugly game, both from a presentation standpoint, but also from a polish standpoint. There was a point during one of the matches we threw together a couple of matches. And we decided that we're going to have managers it was a one-on-one match. We were going to have managers for both the matches. And it was me versus the computer. The computer manager kept trying to distract me, which is fine. That's what a manager should do, right? My manager didn't do shit other than distract my computer opponent by simply standing outside the ring like a manager should do. So at one point, and I forget if it ended up in a 10 counter or not, but at one point my manager is just standing outside the ring and my computer opponent is just walking into the computer manager as the ref starts to count down from 1 to 10. I forget if it resulted in a 10 counter now or not, but I was just like, oh, that's not how any of this should go, especially for a game that's trying to be a little more over the top, a little more arcadey. You would think that it would be harder to distract a computer character by simply being than just having a manager. So I think between the controls, like, it took me a little while to get the controls, but it didn't seem that hard. Like, it seemed a lot more basic than something like a WWE, again, for better or for worse. But I think between the god awful ugly graphics, the non-existent entrances in the game, the incredibly dated presentation, right? Like, characters don't look the way they're supposed to look because their looks have changed a zillion times since this game came out. Arenas don't look the same. The music has changed. All of that stuff was incredibly outdated, even when the game originally came out, which is fair because that's the same thing I would criticize the WWE games for. But the content sucks too. We fired up a career mode, and the career mode is all about like, oh, you're going to join AEW. And you can pick any character from the roster to join, to go on this journey, or you can create a character. And I suspect that they wanted you to create a character for this because the story makes a hell of a lot more sense if you're not already a pre-existing star in AEW, especially someone who debuted in a certain way. So we picked Jon Moxley. Jon Moxley famously showed up at the end of Double or Nothing, beat up Kenny Omega, beat up Chris Jericho to kind of announce his arrival in AEW. But in this, it's like Jon Moxley, like it starts with Jon Moxley working out in a gym that already has a bunch of AEW merchandise in it. And then he gets a call from Tony Khan. There's very little voice acting, by the way. And the voice acting that is there is about as sleepy. Like when I think about, in my opinion, I think AEW has some of the best commentary, if not the best commentary team of individuals working today. Like I think Taz is a phenomenal kind of technical and analysis commentator. I think Tony Schiavone, one of the greatest of all time, if not the greatest of all time, when it comes to color commentary. I think as a play-by-play announcer, I think Excalibur is phenomenal. And I think when JR, good old Jim Ross, has that energy, I think he still brings weight to a main event and stuff like that, right? But then this game's so old that like William Regal's in it. And it's like the sleepiest sounding, like, hi, I'm William Regal. And it's like, that's not like William Regal has a certain, like seriousness to him, right? Like he's not always a heel. He's not always a menacing character, but like when William Regal talks, you better shut up, right? Whether he's in NXT or Black Bull Combat Club or whatever, right? So I'm sitting there and I'm like, man, just all of the presentation for this is off. Like if I was AEW and I was looking at this game and I had maybe not been as directly involved as AEW was, my understanding is that like a lot of people in AEW were very hands-on and very engaged with the development of this game. But let's say they weren't. If I was AEW and this is the game that my developer that I had contracted to make made me, I would say this does not represent our product whatsoever. And I think it also went on to, so between like kind of the ho-hum, kind of gameplay, the terrible production quality, the poor representation of the product, both when this game was being made and the current day product, I just felt like it was yet another example of AEW's poor marketing, because I think AEW is producing the best wrestling on the planet today. Whether you're new to wrestling, whether you're a long-standing fan, assuming you're somebody who, so I think the only problem that AEW has in terms of the current product that they're producing is that unless you are stuck in your ways of how wrestling should look, how it should be presented, and how the matches should go and how the story should go, you may not like AEW. But if you're willing to go in with an open mind, I think you will find that whether you're watching a pay-per-view or watching an episode of Dynamite or Collision or Rampage, whatever, AEW is really cooking, in my humble opinion, right? But I don't think AEW is very good at marketing. You hear all the times about low, live attendance and things like that. And I think it's because AEW has not figured out how to be the marketing machine that WWE is. Now, in fairness, I don't want AEW to be the marketing machine that WWE is, because most of WWE just feels like a long commercial interrupted with some wrestling. And a lot of that wrestling feels stale and bland, and the stories are stale and bland, and the presentation is stale and bland, as it has been for the last 20 something years, right? People talk about, oh, Triple H is bringing it back, brother. He's going to really kick it into gear. Everything that I've watched from WWE feels like it could have been produced by Vince McMahon, right? And obviously, I think we're at a point now where there are a lot of things that AEW does that you look at and you're like, oh yeah, that's a very Tony Khan-like thing to do. But it still feels like AEW still feels like an all hands on deck thing of like a lot of people being invested in the production, the stories of not just their segments, but everybody else's segments. It feels like everyone is kind of in this together in AEW, whereas with WWE, it very feels like this comes from the minds of a few corporate masterminds and you're just in your role to play your part and things like that. And I think that is the way I feel about AEW Fight Forever, is very much the opposite of how I feel about the genuine AEW product. So in that sense, like AEW Fight Forever just feels like a total failure of not just being a fun to get into wrestling game, but also a wrestling game that AEW fans could really sink their teeth into. I just don't feel like there's a lot there. I don't think buying extra content would fix the problems with that game. And I'm just incredibly disappointed because I don't even I like AEW so much that I don't even need to play a wrestling game with AEW in it, because I don't think you're going to be able to produce a video game that's going to be able to allow me to play a wrestling match that was as exciting as, Will Ospreay versus Kenny Omega, right? I don't think you're going to find a multi-man crazy weapons brawl that's going to be as good as any of the Stadium Stampedes or any of the Anarchy in the arenas, right? I don't think you're going to be able to put together a tag team match that is as good as FTR versus Jay White and Juice Robinson on Collision, or any other tag match, right? I'm like specifying, these matches just to be like, I don't think the wrestling game will be able to top the wrestling product, because that is how good AEW is when the bell rings. So their continued development and continued support for this game has actually been a little bit of a bummer as well, because if I was AEW, I would fucking move on to anything else, right? Like, make anything that isn't this. If you want to take another crack at it, fine. I guess I can't fault you for trying. Even WCW and other games got multiple, WCW and ECW got multiple games, but make anything else. Make a fucking kart racing game where it's Bryan Danielson throwing chairs at people from a race cart. Maybe that's not a great idea, but just, I don't need a wrestling game from my wrestling company. I just don't, right? Because I think WWE has already figured that part out. It's been a long time for them, but I think they finally figured out how to make a half decent wrestling game. And guess what? If you want AEW in it, you can just download all the created characters that the community of players produces every time one of those games comes out. If you want to play as a decent looking created Darby Allin or Sting, or, fight in a double or nothing arena or whatever, they've kind of figured that stuff out in terms of community content creation in WWE games. It's fucked up to say it, but I think WWE 2K24 or whatever the current WWE game is a better AEW game than AEW Fight Forever. So with that said, I don't think there's a scenario where AEW Fight Forever goes on sale low enough for me to want to buy it and play more of it to see if I have been misinformed in the short period of time in which I've played it. When we were hanging out at the family's house, we were also playing some Dredge. And when I think about cozy games, chill, cozy games, I often think of them as games that I can obsess over. So I think about my time playing, my time at Porsche and my time at Sandrock. And those are games that when I was playing them, I was kind of just all in, not to keep talking about AEW, but I was all in on those games in the sense that when I fired them up, I was very much focused on, I got to do this a certain way. I got to maximize my return on my crops, or maximize my resource management and gathering and my production and all that stuff. Like, I just need to get the most out of everything that I do. And in fairness, when you play one of those types of games that has that upgrade progression, in something like Dredge, if you fish enough times and sell enough fish, you will be able to get a better boat, we're going to need a bigger boat because we're catching all these fish, or a faster boat, or a boat that allows you to explore different areas, right? But I think when I watched and played a little bit of Dredge, the thing that kind of got me thinking was like, what if I just kind of just took it all in? What if I was there for the vibes? What if I was just there to just be in that world, to just, enjoy the simple nature of fishing in this kind of haunted, spooky world, right? And that kind of got me thinking about how I've approached cozy games in the past. I've been like, well, I just need to maximize, like, it's a very simple game, harvest the crops, do your mining, build your items, manage your resources, make money so you can do this all better, faster, stronger. But when I saw Dredge, I thought, you know what? What if I just kind of took it all in? What if I was there to enjoy the ride? So that was on PS5 where I played that. I don't have Dredge, but it got me thinking that, like, one of these days I would like to go back and play some more Dredge, and also probably finally check out Dave the Diver. I've never played Dave the Diver. I know people swear by Dave the Diver, and the thing about Dave the Diver that makes it so addicting, if I can use that word, is the idea that, like, you fish by day, you manage your restaurant by night, and then you spend the money to upgrade your fishing equipment and do it all over again. But there's always this idea in Dave the Diver that, like, oh, one more day. I'm going to do this for one more day, then I'm going to go to bed. One more day, then I'm going to go to bed. And the next thing you know, you've been playing the game for 3 hours longer than you intended to. Whereas with Dredge does have a day and night cycle, but there's never like a hard stop in it, right? Like, you can go to sleep. It doesn't take very long to wake up and do it again. Or you can run the risk of fishing at night when the creatures are out and about and the water's the most dark and all that stuff. But Dredge, very, very cool. I would like to get into some cozy gaming. I have not played a cozy game in a while. I thought about maybe getting into Stardew Valley. I've never really played a ton of Stardew Valley, but maybe I'll get into that. Also very much a day-night cycle sort of games, wake up, do your work. You run out of, time in the day, sleep, do it all over again sort of thing. But I'm really into Marvel Midnight Suns. We're going to save Marvel Midnight Suns for the last game, because I have finally finished and platinumed Ghost of Tsushima. I played through the main DLC, the main story of the DLC, which you do not need for the platinum, but I played it anyways. And then I beat the main story of Ghost of Tsushima, and then I just very quickly ran around completing the last couple of side quests and collectibles that I needed to get the platinum. So I have 100% completed the trophies in Ghost of Tsushima. I beat the main story in Ghost of Tsushima. And I think it just further, reminded me and reinforced the idea that I think Ghost of Tsushima is one of the greatest open world action games ever made. Even if you didn't get into a lot of the side content of running around, following foxes to their shrines and, writing haiku poetry in these certain areas of the world, or reflecting on the story in the game when you sit in the hot springs. I think just top to bottom, beginning to end, that story is pretty well done, and it is set in a beautiful world with terrific combat that is engaging from beginning to end. I think the really cool thing about it being an open world game, because when I say it's a great story with terrific combat and the story is good from beginning to end, you didn't have to make it an open world game, but they did. And that open world game feels rewarding to explore, both in terms of like, wow, look at this beautiful environment. Look at these beautiful fields. Look at these gorgeous trees and all of this fantastic stuff. But in every part of the, that open world and the collectibles and the side content, it rewards you by further reinforcing the world that you live in and where that game takes place, right? So when you are exploring and you come across one of those haiku collectibles and you sit there and you compose the haiku is about what you've done in the game and what you've seen so far in the story. And it allows you to take that in terms of the context of Jin Sakai's story and what he's kind of done so far. When you are taking a bath in those hot springs, again, it's just a simple collectible, but when you sit there, you get to choose what you want to reflect on. And then Jin sits there and thinks about like, oh, is this what my father would have wanted me to do as I take on the Mongols, or all this stuff. It's just every little thing reinforces the story, right? When you're doing side quests and you're helping characters in the game they are part of the bigger picture. They are part of the story. It doesn't feel like busy work. It feels like natural extensions of the world that they've created and the story that they're telling in that world. And I think that there are far too many open world games that just lather up with just nonsense collectibles and bullshit for the sake of filling out their large open world. And Ghost of Tsushima is a smaller open world game than some games, but everything that's in it has value. Everything that's in it has meaning and purpose. I think that ending is pretty fantastic. There is a choice that you make at the end of that game, which I think is it's a choice that when I made the choice, I was like, well, duh, this makes sense. But if you interpreted the story differently than me, I could see you being like, oh, actually, this choice makes a lot of sense. But either way, I think it's a game that really sticks the landing in terms of the ending. It also is an ending that's well written in the sense that when you beat the game, you can still go on and run through the rest of the open world, right? But the world does feel different. The world does feel, changed based on your actions. But it also just makes sense for you to continue to do what you do based on the ending of that game and why you need to keep going out there and finishing up your side quests if you haven't done that already, or taking over the strongholds if you haven't done so already. Like, all that stuff makes total sense. And I'm just blown away by Ghost of Tsushima. I just thought that was an incredible game, top to bottom. Really glad I played it. A gorgeous PC version, and I'm looking forward to whatever the folks at Sucker Punch are working on. Rumors are Ghost of Tsushima 2, but we shall see. So after I beat Ghost of Tsushima, I moved on to another game. And that same family member whose house I was over playing PS5 games like Dredge and AEW Fight Forever, they were getting into South Park: The Stick of Truth, which got me thinking, not to necessarily like copy them or follow in their footsteps or whatever. Not that it really matters. I'm curious about South Park: Stick of Truth, despite not being a big South Park guy. But it got me thinking about turn-based RPGs in general. And I really don't play a lot of those games. The only example I can think of turn-based RPGs that I've played is Persona 4 and some of the old Final Fantasy games. But Marvel Midnight Suns came out. It came out for free as part of the Epic Games Store, excuse me. And I was like, you know what? Let's give this a shot. I like Marvel. I don't know anything about Midnight Suns. I don't know anything about this game. Besides that, it is a turn-based card battling game. And we'll explain the combat in a moment. But what is Midnight Suns? So who are the Midnight Suns? Let's explain that. The Marvel Midnight Suns are basically the paranormal, investigative group that are not as powerful or as prominent as something like the Avengers. Now, based on the story that I've played so far, there are Avengers in the game. Captain Marvel is in the game. Doctor Strange is in the game. Which makes sense because he's kind of a paranormal wizard guy anyways. But Iron Man is also in the game, right? And, but the main Midnight Suns, as far as I can tell, prior to the story kind of kicking off, the Midnight Suns are Blade, Magic, Nico, Minoru, and Ghost Rider. Now, this is not Johnny Blaze. The name of this Ghost Rider escapes me, but basically the idea is that like different people can be Ghost Rider because the spirit of vengeance can just take over other bodies if it chooses to. Instead of riding a motorcycle, this Ghost Rider has like a muscle car that they drive and all that stuff. But you are a created character known as the Hunter, and the Hunter is this kind of 400-year-old half demon creature that was born from their mother Lilith, who is this demon lady that's trying to take over the world. You have defeated Lilith once before. That's why you were sleeping for like 300 years. And now Hydra, the Nazis of the Marvel Universe, have resurrected Lilith with their weird demon magic interests. And now Lilith is back. So the Midnight Suns have revived you to take on Lilith. But now you are doing it with a new Midnight Suns than who you remember being with and all that stuff. So that's why it's kind of like a fish out of water type story, because you've been sleeping for 300 years. So there's like a lot of really fun writing and stuff that kind of sets up who you are and how you're going to be interacting with these other characters in the Midnight Suns. So for example, there's a part where you meet Blade and you're like, "Stay back, vampire, I will destroy you." And Blade's like, "Nah, I'm cool. I'm actually a half vampire. That's why I'm out during the day. I know you had questions about me being out during the day, but I'm a half vampire." And your character is literally called the Hunter. And there's a moment where you're talking to Blade and you turn to Blade and you're like, "Hey, Blade, what's your real name?" And Blade's like, "Oh, I'm not telling you. What's your real name?" And then you say, "My mom literally named me the Hunter." "Well, are you going to tell me your real name?" And Blade's like, "Nah, I'm not going to tell you my real name." And there's like fun stuff like that. But the game primarily takes place in the Abbey. The Abbey is your base of operations. While you're there at the Abbey, you can do things like upgrade your character abilities. You can customize your character looks. You can customize the way the Abbey looks. You can explore the grounds of the Abbey. The Abbey is pretty much like a haunted mansion that has kind of been taken over by the Midnight Suns, with some like Tony Stark tech thrown in, but also like Tony Stark has like a big map of the world and this like war room that you go into, and it's all high tech. But then you go explore the Abbey and you're like, "Oh, there's this weird demon furnace that's being managed by Tony Stark and Doctor, I was almost called him Mr. Strange, managed by Tony Stark and Doctor Strange." And that's where you go to like upgrade and research new abilities and all this crazy stuff. So it is this weird mix of like the traditional, sci-fi Tony Stark tech, but also like weird hippie demonic magic from the other characters in the game. And I think it's really cool. Like, I just like the idea of being like, I don't need to always be the most powerful superhero in a game. If I'm part of the Midnight Suns and we're out there doing the weird demonic, investigative stuff that the Avengers like Thor doesn't have time for, I think that's still really neat and cool. And you still get that idea of being part of a bigger team with some of the characters that you meet later in the story. But basically, you have been resurrected to go fight your mom again and track down Hydra and figure out what's going on. And when you're in combat, it is a turn-based card battling game. So it is when you go into a battle, it is 3 characters. You do not have to always bring the Hunter. So if you want to bring Tony Stark and Ghost Rider, if you want to bring Iron Man and Ghost Rider and Doctor Strange into battle, some battles you can do that. And the way that it works is each character has 8 cards in their deck. Those cards represent their abilities in battle. When you start a battle, you will have a handful of cards. I think you get like 5 cards to start with. And those cards can be one of 3. They can be attack cards, they can be defense cards, or they can be heroic cards. Now, an attack card or a defense card can be something like, this is going to do 10 damage to an enemy, and it's also going to do knockback, right? And also, it will give you 1 heroism for using the card. The reason why you are trying to generate heroism by using your cards is because your heroic cards are more powerful cards, but they need heroism to actually be useful. So you might have an attack that's like, "Oh, this is going to do like 50 damage, but it's going to need 4 heroism." So it'll be locked in your deck as you try to use the other cards to generate heroism to do these big super attacks. Each character has at least two heroism heroic cards in there, and then balanced out with defense and attack. Some characters are going to be more useful in terms of defensive things, like, "Oh, I'm going to increase the damage for my allies," or "I'm going to cast a spell that weakens an enemy, but I'm not actually going to do direct damage," stuff like that. "Oh, I'm going to heal my allies," so on and so forth, right? Or, you might have somebody like Blade who has the ability to life steal. So if you're low on health, if Blade is low on health, he can do damage to that enemy and then steal some health back from them to heal himself. Or things like, "Oh, I'm going to inflict bleed on an enemy, so every turn that they take for the next 2 turns, they're going to deal a little bit of damage to themselves as they bleed. Maybe I'll be able to kill them in 2 hits or whatever the case may be. You also have the ability to move. So when you are moving around the battlefield, it's not so much about taking like, shelter or cover, like in something like XCOM. It's more about positioning yourself away or towards enemies, depending on what you're looking to do from an attack standpoint. So I'll give you an example. Ghost Rider has an attack where he attacks anything that's in a line, right? It's in a straight line in front of him, right? So if you move yourself to be in front of, say, 2 or 3 enemies, when you use that attack, you'll be able to take out all of them at the same time using that attack. But you only get a certain amount of card plays, so you can only use a certain amount of cards per turn. You can only move a certain amount of times per turn. And then the other thing that you can do every turn is redraw. So you can sacrifice a card in your deck to redraw a different card. But sometimes you can get perks and bonuses for using a redraw on one of your current cards. So for example, a lot of the Iron Man cards, if you redraw that Iron Man card, you will get it back, but with a perk or bonus. So one of the examples is Iron Man has an attack that does like knockback, right? It'll knock an enemy backwards. Now, when you do knockback, you can do things like aim your enemy into a part of the environment. So you can knock your enemy into another enemy. You can knock your enemy into an electrical an electrical circuit that'll electrocute the enemy and do more damage. Or you can knock your enemy into an explosive barrel or, like a hole in the ground or whatever, right? It'll do more damage. But if you redraw that Iron Man card that does knockback, it might give it a perk or a bonus that's like quick. And what quick means is that if you use that attack, that's a quick attack, and it kills an enemy, it will re-add that card play, not the card itself, but the use of the card play back into your hand so that you can do extra attacks. So that's why things like, oh, I'm going to take out the weaker enemies and it'll actually using quick attacks, that'll allow me to save my big attacks, which maybe are heroic attacks because I use the quick attacks to generate heroism, into my hand so that I can do a big bad attack on an enemy to kind of really take out a lot of birds with one stone, so to speak. And there is a lengthy tutorial. There's actually a lengthy tutorial for not just the combat, but for what you can do in and around the Abbey outside of combat. So really, it takes you like 5 hours. I would say the game doesn't really get going until about 5 hours in. And I know this might sound all confusing and crazy, especially describing the combat. I was someone who did not think he was going to like this combat whatsoever. I thought the idea of cards was confusing, but the thing is that just think of it like this. As long as you're familiar with what your allies can do in terms of, okay, Doctor Strange does these types of attacks. The Hunter, is going to do these types of attacks, and you can always upgrade your abilities and swap out cards as you see fit as you unlock more abilities. But I think the thing is, you just need to have a pretty good understanding of like what Blade is capable of doing in order to succeed when a Blade card shows up in your hand. And for that, I will say that I think the combat is pretty fun. It doesn't take very long to go through a lot of the combat encounters that I've seen so far. And again, you don't have to worry about positioning your enemy, your teammates in terms of cover the way you would in an XCOM. It's more about where am I in position to the traps in the environment, and where am I in position to the enemies. The reason why I say that is because every enemy, when you're observing the battlefield, every enemy already has an icon marked on them telling you which character they're going to attack. So you don't have to worry about moving Blade into a position where everyone's going to gang up on Blade or everyone's going to gang up on Iron Man. Every enemy on the battlefield at the start of the game, or sort of a match, will tell you which character they are targeting. So if you have a character that doesn't have a lot of health or is more of a healer or more of a whatever, you can actually take out those enemies earlier in the match so that you don't have to worry about your weakest character taking all this damage and dying or whatever the case may be. There are also attacks where Captain Marvel does this, where you can taunt an enemy. So if you attack an enemy that is not currently targeted at Captain Marvel, that taunt will then turn the target to Captain Marvel, which makes sense. Captain Marvel is a big, buff character. They can take a lot more damage than some of the spellcasters in the game, which makes sense as well, right? So that's really cool. I think the combat is a ton of fun. Really, really enjoying the combat. But I think for me, the thing that I enjoy the most is the way that Midnight Suns is pretty much an interpretation of the Persona franchise. If you've never played Persona, let me explain. The way the game works is each day you wake up and you can talk to characters in the environment, or you can go on a mission, but each mission costs you 1 day, right? So whether that's a side mission or a story mission, right? Now I will say that there's no risk necessarily of running out of days or wasting a day. Like, I've done a lot of side quests and I've still had one story mission just staying there forever and ever. And the story doesn't progress until I do that story mission. But basically each day you wake up, you can explore the Abbey, explore the grounds. You can start a research project in the Forge if you haven't gotten one going already. You can go work out in the yard. Each day you can work out with a different character, which gives you experience points and gives that character a buff. So if you go work out with, say, Iron Man, Iron Man will get a combat buff. And if you take that same Iron Man that you just worked out with into battle, they will have an additional bonus for that fight, which is neat. Sometimes the fight bonuses can last a couple of days, not just 1 day. So if you worked out with, say, Iron Man 1 day and then did a mission, and then the next day you worked out with, Doctor Strange, maybe both of those characters will have buffs in case you take them into battle together. But really, the thing for me about, your off time from battle is talking with the characters. Every night you can, typically hang out with one of the characters, which gives you a little bit of dialogue, a little bit of backstory to that character. But when you are hanging out with those characters, you are also building up a relationship meter, which gives you costumes and perks and bonuses for that character, so that it's not just about taking them into battle and leveling up their combat abilities, but also learning more about them from a social standpoint, which allows you to benefit when you go back into combat with them. Or in some cases, that character that you've learned more about will then give a bonus to the main hunter character, which is really neat as well. But because you're doing things on a day-by-day basis, it sometimes means you have to choose. Do I hang out with the emo kids? The emo kids are Magic, Nico Minoru, and Doctor Strange, who are performing rituals in the backyard of the Abbey as they try to learn more about the hunter's past and what happened before the hunter died. Or do you want to play video games in the common room with Ghost Rider as you learn more about his backstory, and then, you hung out with Ghost Rider enough, now he'll show you his car that he's been working on and all this cool stuff. But again, it's on a day-by-day basis. So you wake up, you start your researches, assignments, you work out with somebody, you maybe talk to somebody, learn more about what's going on. You go on a mission. After you're done that mission, you can wind down with people in your crew. And after you've done that, you can explore the Abbey or go to bed to start the next day. And that cycle kind of continues. And it's just so effective. It's so effective of, like, I only have to worry about one combat mission per day. So it's not like I'm ever going to be in a scenario where, like, oh my God, I just haven't talked to somebody in forever because I've been doing nothing but combat. Like, you will always get an opportunity to hang out with somebody, talk to them, and work out with them, or whatever the case may be. And it's just so much fun because for me, like, when I think about RPGs, I think not necessarily about, the combat, but I think about your dialogue options, your influence on the world, your ability to talk to people. And I think that's the thing about Midnight Suns that I find so effective. I think the combat is cool and it definitely gets me from A to B, but it's the ability to be like, hey, did you know that, like, Blade is worried about vampires, attacking the Abbey? So you walk around the castle, the Abbey grounds with him, and he's like, okay, there's no vampires. Okay, we're cool. Or Captain Marvel, explaining to you that like, she had to tell Thor that from a scientific and statistical standpoint, she is more powerful than Thor. And then Thor had this big ego trip where now he's all sad that he's not the mightiest Avenger of them all, and just cool backstory stuff like that, right? There's also a social media part of the game where you get like this, like basically it's a cell phone, and you can go, which is basically a menu system. And when you go into the menu system, you can see the members of the Midnight Suns talking with each other and communicating on different aspects of the game, the story and stuff like that. So there was this part where the Midnight Suns were having this like kind of social media debate about what's the right way to hang up the toilet paper in the Abbey, which is cool. Someone has been eating Nico's ramen. Nico's been trying to make ramen and cook for herself, and people keep eating her lunch, and she's trying to figure out what's going on. She's talking to people on social media. Sometimes people will also ask you for favors. So, Captain Marvel was like, hey, can you personally come see me today? Because I'd like to ask you a question. And when they ask you a question, you kind of have like a yes or no choice of like, what do you want to, kind of give them as your answer. And that'll give you different perks and bonuses. But like, again, from a social standpoint, I think Midnight Suns is super engaging. I think the story is pretty good, even if I think a lot of it is kind of weird, hippie demonic mumbo jumbo compared to what I'm used to, which is a little more sci-fi fantasy in my Avengers and Marvel stuff in general. And I think the combat is a lot of fun. Like I have definitely been thinking like 2 or 3 moves ahead in terms of, okay, I want to do this to set up this to do this, and then it all works out really well. The only thing I'll say from a combat standpoint is there are times where I will have put a character out of position and paid the price for it. So your enemies can also do knockback or, different targeted attacks. And there've definitely been scenarios where I have put Captain Marvel next to a red barrel, the explosive barrel, not thinking about it. And then they blow up that barrel and do a ton of damage to Captain Marvel, to which I say like, oh, I guess I could have avoided that if I had just, thought a little bit more about what I was trying to get at in terms of positioning. But I think Midnight Suns is awesome. I think it's a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to seeing where that story goes, but I'm also looking forward to seeing what, sort of abilities and upgrades I can get into to further explore the combat. I have not gotten all the characters in the game. That's also the other thing, is like you are building up your crew of characters. So you kind of start the game with Captain Marvel, Nico, Magic, Blade, Doctor Strange, and Iron Man. But I have just unlocked Spider-Man, who is also part of my crew. He has his own separate story, his own upgrades and personal interests and stuff like that, which is really cool. So I will probably be playing Marvel Midnight Suns for the foreseeable future, but I am very curious to check out Dredge, Dave the Diver, and maybe even check out Stardew Valley as well at some point. But, not a lot of games coming out in the meantime. I mean, they have all these games positioned for, fall and winter time. So I probably have a lot to get through backstory wise in the meantime, but I'm glad I played Ghost of Tsushima. Fantastic game. I'm really surprised by how much I'm enjoying Marvel Midnight Suns, and I'll be playing that for the foreseeable future. You can find everything that I do over at my Linktree, linktree.com/GnittWitt, GnittWitt, Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky. I am all over the place, though maybe not in as many places as I used to be. And we will see you all next week for episode 100 of Glitch Report. We will see you then. Take it easy. Thank you so much for watching and listening.